Well, very good afternoon. Magnificenz and Spektabilität, as we say in German. I'm very happy to be back in Poland. Last time I was here in March last year in Warsaw, and I had visited your wonderful country many times, being born in Gliwice. And I was also very strongly involved in the negotiations when you came into the European Union at the beginning of this century, and Andrzej Ciemaszko at that time played a very important role in all the negotiations and also in all the, if I may say so, ongoing preparation for the calls, the dedicated calls and the preparatory measures for adhering to the Commission and the European Union, etc. So I know pretty well quite a few areas of your country, but I've never been in Łódź before. And that's why I'm particularly happy, having Googled a little about also the enormous industrial tradition of this city, which was not at all known to me, which I think is also an obligation and a very good pole position for you now for the future, for the necessary transformation process in which many regions in Europe are to be found. Now, I presume that you know what the bioeconomy means, but I would love to give you a very short rundown on how and why we did it precisely 10.5 years ago. Well, at that time, many of you were still at school, others were already grown up, others were already studying, etc. At that time, between 2000 and 2005, Europe talked a lot about the knowledge society. That was the big buzzword. Everything was knowledge-based economy, knowledge-based society, etc. And in Brussels, we were very strongly pushing a stronger integration of academia and also industry. And we were creating the so-called institution of technology platforms, which have been forgotten today, that was a long story about. And at that time, we were also talking about very much the upcoming decade of the biotechnology. It was not only the decade of the brain, as the American president used to say, it was also the decade of the biotechnology, which was supposed to come. And we had the BSE crisis in Europe, which led to a very awkward situation, that the research on agriculture was more or less nil, was reduced to nil. Everything was put into food safety and food security, and nothing was more or less left for agriculture. And I took over the Directorate of Food, the Directorate of Agriculture, of Nutrition, of Forestry, later on Fishery and Biotechnologies, without a single cent for agricultural research. Now at that time, DG Agri, which was the Ministry of Agriculture in Brussels, gave me all the powers for research in the same fisheries. No one was interested. There was a standing committee called the SCAR Committee, which was the oldest comitology committee in the European Union, which was also run by DG Agri, which they also gave to me. They wanted to get rid of that because there was no more money for them. And there I was sitting. The 6th framework program was over, and we were preparing the 7th. And then we read in one of the newsletters about a conference of the OECD in Brussels, in Paris, in which the very strange word bioeconomy in January 2004 for the first time appeared in a footnote of a report of the research ministers of the OECD without saying what it is. A very rough definition of biological resources, animals, plants, microorganisms, and making an economy out of that, which is nice, etc. So my colleagues and myself, we phoned with these people and said, what are you doing with that? No idea, we don't know, forget it. And then we sat together And remember what I told you, it was the time of the knowledge society. Their knowledge played a tremendous role. And then my colleagues and myself, after many, many hours of long brainstorming, we came to the following conclusions. Biological resources are not new. Animals, insects, plants, and also microorganisms. But we know today much, much more than ever on biological resources, from DNA sequencing to metabolistics, etc. So we said to ourselves, why are we not putting into an economic model the increased use and processing of biological resources in the middle? Why? Because we were very, very strongly convinced that the following 4 features of biological resources could help in overcoming many of the global challenges. And that was renewability, first point. The second, that you have a certain carbon friendliness, which you have to prove in some cases, but it is there. Third, that you had the potentials of biological resources to be reused and multi-used. That was the touching point to what is called today the circular economy. And then, and that was the most important one, that nature offered us, by the use of biological resources, new functions, higher stability of organisms, longer life, higher density, higher durability, less toxicity, less carcinogenity, etc., etc. And so we said, why are we not putting all these features together and put in the middle of an economy the biological resources? And that could be reflected also in biomass, and now it comes what the zeitgeist taught us at that time. We called it the knowledge-based bioeconomy because we wanted at that time, and that is still very, very valid today. I'm coming to that in the end. Very valid today, because we wanted also to have, by an increased use of biological resources, offering in thinking and acting, and also in, let me say, performing, to use the potentials of converging technologies like nanotechnology, information technology, cognitive sciences, etc. Now this idea, unfortunately, this knowledge-based element got lost a little over the last years. Unfortunately, I must say, because for my successors it was a little too robust. Knowledge-based bioeconomy, you can't really make it very attractive because you have to explain it, etc. It's a monstrous expression. So they simply said bioeconomy. I think that's wrong, because, and I'm now preempting what I want to say later on, had we kept this strong element of also integrating converging technologies, we would have been in a much better position today to join forces between the biologization of industry and the digitalization. That's unfortunately lost. Digitalization agenda all over the world, in particular in Central Europe, in Brussels, in Germany, in your country, is really running ahead. The biologization, instead of jumping on the bandwagon, because of this knowledge-based, they are a little or quite behind. That's a very bad thing which happened, and we have to remedy that in the future. Now, and then it started. I put this project of the knowledge-based bioeconomy after careful discussion with the United States, Brazil, South Africa, India, China, and Russia, very interesting, and the main member states. I put that on the table of Commissioner Potočnik, and in September 2005 we had the first conference on the bioeconomy in Brussels, and only a few months later I got 2 billion euros. That was not bad. 2 billion euros in the 7th framework program, and then the presidencies slowly but steadily took over. In the year 2006, the Finnish made a big story out of that, introducing the element of biorefining. Very interesting. Was the Finnish were doing that. The end of 2006. The Germans had the so-called famous Cologne paper, in which they also included at that time medicine and health research, which then got lost. And then later on we had a strategy in the year 2012. We now have almost 4 billion euros. And now I'm going to start with my talk. And now we are in a situation which I would love to tell you a little more about. We have today more than 50 countries all over the world and more than half a dozen regions all over the world which officially are supporting the strategy or the policy of the bioeconomy. And this happens either via very dedicated strategies carrying that name, or also having respective action plans, roadmaps, etc., or just activities which don't carry the name, but the name like green growth or biofuels, etc. And it's quite interesting that many of these more than 50 countries in the world, they have strategies which are very frequently limited to an increased use of biotechnology or to biofuels. These are the two items which you find in most of the countries really in the foreground. And one can say today, after these 10 years, if you look on this, and I'm going to show you just a picture in a moment on the map here, where you have the very different countries. And what is very interesting is that today, after 10 years, we should not talk about the bioeconomy as such, but quite a few bioeconomies which differ in their shape, which differ in their dimension, which differ also in their focus, very much depending on the strength and the weaknesses in resources, in biomass existence, in the question of neighboring industrial branches like chemistry or food or just agriculture, or both, or all of them together, so that we should simply recognize that there is a big diversity of various models. And this will have an impact very clearly on a lot of points. For example, the legal frameworks, the institutional frameworks, the funding question, to what extent the relationship between private and public, etc., etc. Now, this is the picture which at the first Global Bioeconomy Summit in Berlin in November of last year under Frau Merkel in Berlin was designed, and which shows, you know, the greener it is, the deep greener, the more directly dedicated it is to the bioeconomy. Now, it's also interesting that on the political level, the G7 last year for the first time have officially dealt with this new concept. And the G20, which will have now are under the chairmanship of China, next year will be also under Germany in Hamburg, they will also go to deal more in depth with this interesting new industrial and also economic concept. And it was interesting that 10 years after, in Brussels, it was not a research and technology conference celebrating the 10 year, but it was an investment conference. This is also a certain, if I may say so, sign of maturity that, you know, the scientific content are important, but they are not the only ones to be in the focus. And that is very good and interesting. And as I told you, with respect to the global aspects, we had the first Global Bioeconomy Summit in Berlin in November last year. Now, when I look on what is happening, and it can only be done with the help of industry and industrial branches, because it's an economy. It's not an environmental movement or a sustainability move or something. It's an economy as we had originally conceived. You know, when you look on what has happened in industry, you have to state that it's in particular chemistry and energy which are in the middle of it. And you have today many bio-based products which are already on the market or just in the pipeline. And a few months ago in Brussels, there was a so-called Bioeconomy flat, which was shown, which was visited by the whole college, you know, because it was showing, you know, what you can already do in a flat with an apartment, etc. And you had a very small booklet which was given, which I can only advise you to read, which shows you to what extent in our daily practical life bio-based products have already found their markets. It's not known. And the people are sometimes a little hesitating to make a little propaganda about it. But many people feel that the word bio will raise eyebrows, or that is organic farming only, or it's something with gene technology, and therefore the name is a little, if I may say so, hybrid. Now, we have more than 50 chemical molecules which are already being replaced to become bio-based, from levulinic acid to acrylic acid, or even succinic acid, etc. And this is very strongly, if I may say so, linked with the so-called greening of the chemical industry, which in particular for countries which still have a large and important chemical industry is of importance. Now, what is also interesting is that the portfolio of industrial applications is growing month by month, and I cannot follow anymore on the various portals which exist in the world, you know, the many products and new product lines which appear practically each month. And whether it is bio-based PET bottles, or the so-called PEF, or if it's shirt, which is Coca-Cola, by the way, or shirts, or eyewear, or shoe shine articles, bio-based mortar, heat damming, non-flammable foams, and just in the last days, BASF announced that it is completely changing the productions of its long boards in skating. You know what a long board is when you're going skating, you know, the rolls of it, you know, they are now being replaced by bio-based poly-THF, which is a very important polymer, which makes, and that is interesting, the skating softer. And that is a very important point. Don't be misled to think about the potentials of the bioeconomy more or less in environmental or sustainability parameters. Industry will only do it if this is profitable, and they have to act like that because they have to earn money. They are not pestalozzis. If we like it or not, we have to accept that. So what I always used to say, and I take this PET and PEF bottle always as a good example, the bio-based product must offer an add-on value. It must be simply better, not only based on renewables. That's nice for a small group of people who are prepared to pay a little more of it, but whether this is really a big group, this is very doubtful, but that is reality. No, it should be better, and it should offer one of these functions which I described before. And if you look on this PEF technology, for example, it's interesting. If you have a Coca-Cola bottle, a PET bottle, you put it into your basement. After 1 year, about this part has disappeared. The oxygen release is released from the bottle. Now, this PEF, bio-based PEF, has the advantage that the containment of oxidation is nil. It can't get released, and it's much less weight, so you have logistics costs to be done, and it is of longer endurance. So a very important advantage of this product, in addition to its good renewability scheme, its good sustainability record, etc. So that is extremely important. And the same also when I have here heat damming, which has been released by a French institute and also together with the Fraunhofer Institute, you know, that you have so-called bio-based foams, you know, for buildings which are easily flammable. Now, what has been developed now on the basis of bio-based foams is that it is non-flammable. Or, for example, these longboard rolls in skating by BASF is offering a softer, a much more comfortable feeling and skill, you know, when you're going to skate. So please don't forget that. In the research area, one should also always ask itself, if I have these 4 features, renewability, carbon neutrality or carbon friendliness, multi and reuse, and then new functions, to what extent is the latter one, the new function, something which can be good for the economics of my product? So don't be misled only to have in a kind of Gutmenschentum, as we say in German, you know, friendly people, only the environment. take the other features as well into the picture. Then the product can really be promising and can really be of good future. Now, there is a growing number, as I told you, of bio-based production line for intermediates, for platform chemicals, and the importance, just to repeat it, all around the renewable carbon. You are all chemists, I presume, or many of you. It's the renewable carbon which is in the center, and that's everywhere the same. But there is, in the course of the last years, a certain shift in many of the research areas, and that is less from the pure content of the biological resources, more to optimization of processes. That's quite an interesting thing. It doesn't mean that it will remain like that, but for the time being, there is a shift in the focus of research work. It's a focus also from the so-called cell factory to the real factory, to prototypes, to demonstration. And that means we need to have economics much more in the foreground than before. We have reached this maturity state at this moment, so that we have to look more on the back end of the value chain, and that would be norms, that would be standards, that would be procurement questions, that would be marketing elements, but also consumer acceptance. So that is a certain maturity sign, if I may say so. There is one point which I could imagine is also of interest for you here in Poland, and that is CO2. CO2 not as a climate factor, or sometimes a climate killer, but as a, well, I would say so, a resource. It's becoming more and more in the attention of researchers, but also operators, in particular of big chemical companies or steel and coal plants, and also waste managers. It's becoming more and more conscious that the CO2 can be turned to be a resource. And that is, in addition, a reason why the knowledge-based bioeconomy around the renewable sea is in the foreground of our deliberations. Now, all in all, within the last, I would say, 2 or 3 years, the frontiers among the chemical products, among biofuels, among proteins, also bio-based proteins, be it for food purposes or for other purposes, they are becoming more or less swimming. That's very important to note. And I don't know yet in what direction the voyage will go. And that will be, in addition, dear friends, will become more complicated by adding big data. It will open new ways and new frontiers in the packaging area, in the formulation area, in the logistics, and in the food area, and wherever it is. So we must be very careful not to miss this opportunity. Now, large industrial companies are much better equipped today to take up the potentials and also the privileges of knowing about them than smaller and medium companies. But what I find quite interesting, in particular the big chemical giants, they are very hesitating in outing themselves to really invest into the bioeconomy. That's quite interesting. For whatever reason, maybe it's fiscal reasons for writing off to remain a chemical company, etc. It's quite interesting. You know, there is a certain hesitation to declare an object or a product to be bio-based. It's also maybe because it might be misunderstood as something like with organic farming or too green, or I don't know, maybe also with a as I said before, genetically disposed of, or whatever it is, etc. We have to take that into account and always look in the background of a product. And there you will find that they are really bio-based, even if they are not always called like that. We have, on the other hand, a big deficit in the awareness of the potentials in small and medium companies, not with very small technology companies sometimes who are very active in preparing breakthroughs in that, you know, startups which are in enzymes production or in metabolics or in the very innovative part of simulation or something like that. You know, I don't mean that, but medium companies, you know, are normally having a tremendous deficit in funding and really getting acquainted with the potentials of these these biological resources used in an increased way. So that is unfortunately a lesson we have to learn. We learned all over Europe. It's not only Poland, it's not only Germany, it's all over Europe. Now we have strong private and public industrial investments also outside Europe, and particularly in the United States. Very strong now in China and in Canada. We have it also in Europe, the largest investments, more than 1.4, and it's not 1.2, it's 1.4 billion euros, I'm sorry, it's billion euros. It's by Metsä Fiber in Finland. Then we also have very interesting large investments during the last 3 months on bio-based PHAs, on the polyhydroxyl canoate in France and Italy, very interesting. And we have a very interesting combination between BASF and the Dutch company Avantium on these bio-based PEF bottles plus, which will be an investment of various billion euros, because don't forget Coca-Cola, who is the customer, who is the end customer there, they are producing daily in Europe 300 million bottles. So if they start in 2 years with the first 30%, of the production, or probably already end of next year, that is a process which will really mean something. And before you start on such a process, you must really have sounded the waters, that this is not a mismanagement, that this is not a failure. Now, it's interesting to say that after these 10 years, and it's a long time, we are focusing now already on investment questions, which is in a short period, like 10 years, something remarkable. It's interesting that the European Union and Germany will readapt their first strategy already in the course of the next 2 years. So they have already their first strategies on. We had very recently Spain to come up with, from my point of view, the most advanced and modern strategy on the bioeconomy. Just a few weeks ago, they published it. France and Norway are supposed to do it in June. We'll see. And then in Austria and Ireland, the Czech Republic, and particularly the universities of southern Bohemia, are very much in a pole position for that, but also Latvia, Sweden, Turkey, Argentina, and New Zealand. There are also interesting workloads underway to prepare national strategies or roadmaps or action plans or whatever it is. UK is still undecided, and it is also very interesting to see what the developments in the Visegrad Group will be. There is something which started, in Hungary. You will have one of the largest biorefineries being built by Clariant, a German-Swiss company, a big flagship project of the bio-based industries, a joint undertaking. And in Czech Republic, they have now this week they have a Bioeconomy week in the universities of Brno and another university, and they want to have a strategy next year. And we will see what happens in Poland. Now, the societal strategic discussion have reached now a point which I want to draw your attention, and also try to tell you very clearly that we should not overdoing it. There is a lot of discussion whenever you have a bioeconomy conference today on the development and also the relationship between the sustainable development and also the bioeconomy. That's good, because a few years ago the sustainable development people, and I know what I'm talking about because I brought also the principle of the sustainable development to Europe in the year 2002. I was the first director for environment and sustainable development. Andre knows that, and in Sweden at that time. About 6 or 8 years ago, the sustainable development people not even noticed the presence of the bioeconomy people. And the same is with the COP21 in the environmental global endeavors. It was simply ignored. This has changed. It was extremely interesting to see in Berlin at the Bioeconomy Summit that very important partisans, if I may say so, of the sustainable development like Jeffrey Sachs clearly said that quite a few of the 18 Sustainable Development Goals will only be able to be achieved with the help of biological resources. And they have worked it out very much in detail. And in Utrecht, the last stakeholder conference of the Commission just a few weeks ago, this was also an interesting topic. So this growing awareness among the strategists for global movements, and it's good that this is now an eye to eye, the same level. You know, they have understood what the potentials are, but that does not mean that we should concentrate on the discussion on how our SDGs goals and the bioeconomy work together. This is a strategy discussion which is in certain circles, which is good, you know, but the real work should happen in labs, in industrial companies, and also with respect to new products which are brought to the market. And the same applies to the ongoing discussion on the so-called circular economy. I was really flabbergasted when the European Commission 2 years ago started with this circular economy. You know, we had in Germany in the year 1996 a Kreislaufwirtschaftsgesetz. We had a circular law already. And no one was interested in that when I came to Brussels end of the 90s. No one was interested in that. And all of a sudden, you know, Brussels is rediscovering that, although it's being practiced, you know, in the Kalundborg Declaration already in 2002. And so I really can only shake my head and you know what's happening there. But it's interesting, you need a hype from time to time also in the Commission, which you then have to carry through the village and then see what's coming out of that. And that is at this moment the circular economy, where I have to repeat, the circular element is one of the 4 elements of the bioeconomy, and that means that both concepts are fitting very well in a complementary way, and we should not forget that. Now, and my former colleague John Bell, he is quoting that the bioeconomy is the biological power engine of the circular economy, and you know, if someone wants to occupy the other one, it's absolutely ridiculous. Now, here you have this very nice papillon picture, which is shown by many strategists and theoretical people, you know, which deal with new concepts and new revolutions and the 5th revolution in industrial world, etc., which shows, you know, on one hand side, the part of the papillon is the circular economy, and the other one is the bioeconomy. And what is nice in a papillon is that only if you have both parts, the papillon can fly. So that's so easy that you can also explain to your grandmother, you know, what it means to have the circular and the bioeconomy together. Now, what are the changes and also the lessons which we have learned during the last 10 years with relevance to strategies and to the policies? You know, that could be of interest also for you in Poland, because I'm coming to your potentials in a moment. Biomass is and remains the primary, not the exclusive, natural resource of an economy. Any economy needs a resource, and that is the biomass. And this biomass is a carrier for energy, but also for molecular, for a modular part, for chemicals, biochemicals, proteins, nutrients, etc. And don't forget, in particular in your country, where you have still a very powerful steel industry with downstream processes, you know that CO2 could be used in combination with algae and others as a very important facilitator, you know, and a very important element for a resource. The biorefineries will remain in this landscape the central production facilities. Their primary, but not their exhaustive and one and only feedstock, will be the biological waste resources and biomass, and both are of renewable feature. Recyclability, as I said, and multi and reuse of biomass in very diverse form, in particular the cascade use, will be remaining very important prime functions, and we have to concentrate on new added value chains. That is extremely important, and also very important for you here in this region, where I think you have really a portfolio of various potentials. The biotechnology will be the technological driver. I have to repeat that. The biotechnology will be in particular the industrial biotechnology, the driver, the technology driver of the bioeconomy. But we should not neglect the produced new knowledge by other converging technologies. And here I repeat again what I said about the digitalization, what I said about information technologies, cognitive sciences, etc. In the world's largest food fair, the Anuga in Cologne, which happens all 2 years, in October we had a 2-day session which was only dedicated to the use of digitalization in the food area. And it was absolute smashing, I tell you. Absolute interesting. So I want really very much that you also concentrate on widening your portfolio. I know it's not that easy, and the students are already overloaded with a lot of work, but don't miss that opportunities. And as I said here, the joint potentials and the interface between the digitalization and the biologization are really worthwhile to be further studied and looked at also at the experimental stage. Now, there are new trends which we have to take into account. The first one is resilience. That's rather new. The potentials of resilience here, the Finnish are extremely active. I haven't yet really got all the information on it, but there is a strong movement coming from Finland that resilience is a very important new factor in the bioeconomy. The aspects of health, in particular the so-called One Health, that you have animal health, human health, that you have the agro-business in that this is not to be divided. This One Health, which is pushed very much by FAO and WHO, will only be possible to be explored and dominated by bioeconomy with the help of digital data. Now, the closeness, and not only to the concept of the sustainability, but also the context of the circular economy will remain important trends to be discussed, but I want to warn you, don't lose your time in the discussion on these things. There are other people who are very well equipped to do that. That's their business. They make their living on that. Try to be practical and try really to be found in your labs and also in your companies. What can you do with the products in order to improve them or further develop them? That is extremely important. And there is one appeal to policy and to politics. When we want to be successful, we need to have one important factor to be really well confirmed and reaffirmed, and that is we need to create, in all the frameworks which are dominated frequently by ideologies, a level playing field among the various applications in the bioeconomy. Until today, we have a tremendous undeserved privilege of energy, of bioenergy. Bioenergy is enjoying a lot of privileges of tax exemptions, of attention, political one, etc. And this is not, if I may say so, this is not indeed something which is deserved well. We have also to look on the non-energetic purposes and possibilities and portfolios. And that is very important if we want to be in the future successful. But that is something which in particular has to go to Brussels. Now we should take, in Europe, still take the lead, although the others, in particular China, India, Brazil, and the United States. The United States, and once again the United States, are tremendously taking leadership positions here. And in particular the United States is with a very intelligent policy of combining tax exemptions, then subsidies, and also improvements in the procurement policies, the so-called bio-preferred program, plus particular loans, etc. They have a very smart way, a kind of smart specialization in a completely different way in order to create markets in the public. And once you have a market in a country of 350 million people, of 50 different states, you know, then the private industry is quickly coming. And we in Europe are not able to cope and copy that. Now the economics, and with that I'm going, before I'm coming to give you some proposals for your country, you know, the economics are becoming more and more of importance. And again, I want to repeat something very trivial. We call not the bio movement, we don't call it the biosustainability, we talk about the bioeconomy. Very simple, but also tremendously challenging. Now, what does it mean for Poland? In all humbleness, a lot. But I'm not that sure whether you're aware of that. You have a very good pole position to maximize and also to optimal use the increased reservoir of biological resources for better, eco-friendly and sustainable products and processes, because you have a large untapped reservoir of biomass, including organic waste and industrial residues. You have a very impressive coastal line with a lot of untapped potentials for the blue bioeconomy, and you have also, which is forgotten in many parts of Europe, large reservoirs of forestry and wood. In addition, you have a very good scientific and technological infrastructure. Your faculties in the biotechnologies are very well known. Also for converted technologies, maybe in the area of information technologies, and in a few, 2 or 3 others, you have to keep it up. But you have also a very good educational infrastructure, which is not the case in many, many other European members of the European Union. You have a strong, very modern agriculture, thanks to Brussels, I have to say that, really thanks to Brussels, which is maybe too successful in order to be able to go into a bio direction, and that does not mean organic farming, but broaden the portfolio. That is at least my humble observation from Bonn, from Germany on your country. You have a very large, but from my point of view, still too traditional food industry. So think about that. But you have the preparedness in many of your regions to cope with this new modern way of bio. And that is something which I think is extremely important. You have also a lot of interested stakeholders all over Poland who start to understand what it is around. You have, as I said, hitherto not the traditional, still the traditional forestry and agriculture, but you know, things are moving. Your dependence on fossil energies is really crying for carefully thinking on new options. Not from one day to the other, but as an important mid and long-term subject. Don't do it as my home country did, this Energiewende, to do it within the 2 or 3 years, you know, and then really think it over. Think it over, but do it. And last but not least, you know, you have a deficit in capitalization. You know, there is not enough at this moment private capital there, but that is something, you know, the more you are attractive in the content, you know, the more the private money is coming. That's at least my impression when I look on other parts of Europe. Now, what should be done in order to maximize these potentials? First, and this is trivial what I tell you now, you must map where you are strong and where you are less strong and where you want to be strong. And that could be a combination, but you must do it in a very differentiated way in depth. I've participated in at least 5 of such analysis all over Europe, from the Faroe Islands and Iceland down to Austria and Italy, and also in Germany, in 2 German states. But you have to do that. And you have to give a little money to a company or to an institute to carefully look where are you good, where are you bad, where are you less good, etc., and where are the good practices already in the use of biomass. For example, when you have once done it, then you can really single out those areas which are of more interest. For example, in North Rhine-Westphalia, we now have found out that 3 or 4 cities are very much of interest. And now we have done a very large in-depth analysis on 3 or 4 German cities. It's Mönchengladbach, Krefeld, Aachen, etc., with tremendous interesting results, which will probably result in 1 or 2 small biorefineries which will be built there, etc. So really try to be practical, but first map, make then an analysis, and then go to different people who are going to fund that. And also try to have the potentials of the European Union to be used. Many of the regions which I'm aware of and which I looked in, they have also been quite successful in getting money from the European Commission. Now, what is extremely important is that your conference which you are preparing in October, I think, is a very, very good base for that, because it will give you, first of all, it will force you to think about what is the role of your region and what is the role of your region in Poland and what is the relationship to the others. When you have such a conference, you must really think about that. If you don't have such a conference, you're just doing it by accident, or maybe you get to read it, but you don't really do it in the necessary seriousness and in depth. Now, the second point is that you get a much better knowledge now also on all the different tools, and they are complicated. They are not easy to be understood, but you have a lot of people who understand what's going on in Brussels, etc. But then you must convince Warsaw. That's very important. And there I can't help you. That's your business. You must convince Warsaw that they also understand what it is about, etc. Now, there is Bratislava also, a big stakeholder conference, which is very strongly concentrating on the agriculture part. I think you here in Lodz, you have a much broader portfolio from the textile industry to the machine industry and also to the materials industry. So that, I think, offers a much broader view and also much broader use of portfolio, and also with the ICRI Institute, you have an excellent pole position, I think. So my appeal to you is, what was that? Should I finish or what? Okay, all right. So also think about the structures to do it. It's a very complicated work. Believe me, it's one of the bio and life is one of the most complicated things if you want to transfer and translate it into policies and daily work. But therefore, you have a lot of committees and structures and bodies, etc., etc. Try to map what they do and introduce in many of these existing bodies, not necessarily that you have a new one, introduce chapters with the bioeconomy. But if you think that it is much easier to have something completely new than do it. As the Americans used to say, it works both ways. So that is your decision, but think about it and give yourself a kind of reckoning, what is the best and most practical for you. Have a national advisory body. This is really helpful, believe me. I've seen it in all Scandinavian countries. I've seen it in all Benelux countries. I've seen it in my home country. I see it at this moment in Italy and in Austria, and I've seen it in France. So a national advisory body is helpful, and try to convince your central government to do so. And don't forget education. You can't implement the bioeconomy and in regions that they start to fly without good, educated, well-educated people. And there is a new trend. I was delighted to hear that you are going to have a master course in 1st of October this year by 3 different institutions and on two different locations in Warsaw and in Łódź. That is excellent, and you're really in best company. Hohenheim in Stuttgart, Lund in Sweden, Glasgow in Scotland, and Ghent in Belgium. They are doing it already, and 2 or 3 other very important places in Europe are preparing it. Even Harvard and Yale think about it. So you're in best company. But don't forget it, and that is very important. And you will see to what extent also this changing in a curriculum with the professors and the students and the postgraduates, and also a new chair which you have, etc. What a kind of challenge that is, because the variety of the disciplines you need to integrate is really exhausting. It's very difficult. It's not easy. Now start an awareness campaign. Also involve NGOs in case they are interested. Don't run after them. I repeat, don't run after them, but invite them. And mobilize existing platforms which you have. Really do that, because don't lose too much energy and brains in creating something new, be it that you really are convinced that this is much better. So I wish you good luck for that. We still have time, I think, for a discussion. And I wish you also a wonderful week, which is supposed to be for the next 2 or 3 days, with beautiful weather, which we didn't have in Germany at this moment. Thank you. So, question.
So, thank you, Christian, for this inspiring lecture, telling us about the sources of bio, circular economy, the biological power engine for this economy, and also for the suggestions what we have to do here. So, the lecture is open for discussion.
Fire on me.
Yes.
I'm Jacek Polak from this faculty.
Oh, yeah.
I'd like to find your opinion about so poor public acceptance of genetically modified plants, genetically modified organisms in general in Europe. And it is a very high level of reluctance of European society to such development, such scientific achievements. Especially that there are some examples developed in Europe. I have in my mind now amphora potatoes developed by BASF company. And as far as I know, it is suspended, it's not cultivated. But it seems to be attractive. I mentioned to my students the lectures about this project. And the second question is, it is well known that so small countries like Denmark, like Netherlands, Belgium, they are very good in biotechnology. We are larger countries than Denmark and Netherlands. So, do you have any recipe for efficient development of this top science?
A very good question, thank you, which are not easy to get an answer for. In particular, with respect to your first question, I have a very strong personal bias because I was very many years responsible for GMOs and funded in Brussels with a lot of money these activities. We found out, for example, in the year 2003 in a study which I asked, that since 1985 the European Commission had spent €500 million on studies to find out to what extent the use of GMOs had an ecological or health detriment. And the result was there was nothing. Now you can 100,000 times put that to the public. You can really make a big announcement on that. People are simply ignoring it. Why? Because there is a very deeply rooted anxiety in Europe for anything which is new. And this is with the potentials of information dissemination. Yeah, and also of that, still sharper to be noted today. To what extent other continents will also do that, I don't know, but my impression is that the risk friendliness and risk preparedness in other continents seems to be higher. Very simple. And we will probably not change this mentality of the Europeans. Probably not. Now, the bad thing it is that the Europeans were normally in many of these areas at the forefront of science. They were discovering it. They were really, defining and refining, the results of their science, etc. And that is to some extent, a very deplorable fact then that the fruits of this work are carried by other continents. So I fear that we will not be able to change that for the time being. And the same is with the nuclear power movement. The same was to some extent with the stem cell, etc. So that is a kind of, in brackets, deficit of Europe, that they are very reluctant in moving towards real novelties. Now, it's quite interesting to note also the contradictions on which the Europeans live in this respect, because the GMOs in health or for pharmaceutical products are widely accepted. But the same moment when it deals with food, when it deals with anything on biodiversity or something like that, then the Europeans are playing around and they don't accept it, which I cannot explain. Now, there's also the role in Europe which is improving now, a very, very negative role of media in Europe, which normally the European media are on scientific grounds less well informed than they are in the United States or in Latin America. That is, unfortunately, for many, many years that was the case. It's improving now. And I think this is an additional reason that the very badly educated, scientifically educated or natural scientifically educated media world, is very quickly jumping on any news which is dramatic without really asking, is this true what is being said here? Is this the impact which is in this or that way really to be transferred to the public in this or that way? Now, this is improving, as I said, but it was, from my point of view, 15 or 20 years ago, surely one of the reasons, that we had this fiasco. Now, with respect to your second question, I sometimes wished I would also live in a smaller country. Because, when I worked in Brussels, I found that the organization of countries which had just 4, 5 or 6 or 7 million people, although that's still enough, they were much better organized than the big tanker like Germany or the French or the British or the Polish or the Spanish or the Italians. That is a fact of life. The smaller you are, the better you know the different circles of life, the quicker you can react. And then you are able to become also, in a very mainstreamed way, innovative. That is something which we have to take as life. And for that reason, these smaller countries have sometimes this advantage, in dealing in this or that way with innovation, etc.
Are there any questions here? I would like to make some comments to you, because you wanted the example of such measure or some sources for bioeconomy. And we want to have a great biomass, economic biomass. If there is some doubt if we have or not. But anyway, we have to work on the soil.
Yeah.
Just prepare the biomass. The only thing we have is just wood and forestry. This part of the bioeconomy is very well developed and just growing. So we have the forestry in a very good shape, even if they just try to cut some pieces of Puszczabiałowieska just now. But I am looking for something modern when you are discussing, let's say, the more political background of the bioeconomy. That you have about any the people are working with science here, sitting more down with the laminar code than reading and discussion with the body about the bioeconomy. So, are there any breakthrough in science to improve the future processes of resources?
I think that's a very good remark. I think that the breakthroughs will probably, in many cases, more incremental than dramatic, but they will be necessary. And what I hear from people, and for that reason, I can only appeal to you, in your daily work, look for a dialogue with those people who are going to apply your results. That means your customers, people in industry, people in product lines, etc. You know, that they tell you, and also the operator of biorefineries, for example, you know, they tell you where they have their problems. Many times, you know, the topics which are dealt with in science are too much decoupled from the real needs in the daily work of many people. Now, this has nothing to do with basic science, which is in addition and which has its rights and also its justification. But the bioeconomy is mainly an economy which is going to accompany, you know, an economic development. And for that reason, we will probably not, expect an enormous breakthrough like let me say the GSM or something like that. That it will be step by step, but that's not bad because, you know, it is really, for example, if you have a bottle, just to repeat that, if you have a bottle which is really much better not to release the oxidation, that's something very important, you know, and if it's just a few grams lighter, and then for the 100 of millions of bottles you need less logistics. This is a tremendous factor for a company and also for the whole world, and also in the life cycle assessments, etc. So we really should not underestimate these small incremental advantages which are then also resulting in it. Now, I think that one of the most basic question in your work, which you should always put in front of you, is the question, simply ask yourself, do we have enough water? It's a very trivial remark. Do we have enough water if we want to do that and that? If we take this and this plant, if you have this and this microorganism, etc. Or is there not something which is offering me a solution with less water? That is so trivially said, but so difficult to answer sometimes, and it can have tremendous impact. I was just in one of the largest food trade fairs in Italy, at Cibus in Parma, and there were several people from the FAO which have shown to us example to what extent farmers in various African countries who up to now were cultivating rice, which was becoming more and more difficult because rice needs a lot of water, and now they had less and less water, and then it was able to replace their cultivation by durum wheat, which is extremely important for pasta, for example. and where is a tremendous shortage at this moment because of very bad harvests in Morocco and also in parts of Afghanistan and in India, etc. So the result of this change of pattern of cultivation for hundreds of thousands of farmers were enormous, and it was only based on a very thorough and robust scientific work of agriculture, water ecologists, specialists in marketing, etc., which then were turning around the cultivation of about 700,000 farmers from rice to durum with all the help and with the harvesting machine and whatever you need there. So this is something which you should think about. And the other point, we talk a lot on biorefining today. Now the biorefining process is as such extremely difficult. And if you talk to the people who work in these pilot plants or demonstration plants or also operational ones, you know, for example, if you simply have straw and then you are going to refine that and you have side streams of this and that area, this extraction and purification is tremendously difficult and really demands very sophisticated technological approaches. But this must be found out in the dialogue, and that's why I think the bioeconomy demands much more than many other research fields a kind of structured talk with the end user, much more. And that is something which the researchers, in particular the older ones, need to know, need to learn. And that is, I think, a very tremendous new challenge also for educational curricula, an enormous way.
Was there any question? Sorry about that. Thomas is first.
Yeah, hello, Thomas Kapala. Well, I'd like to follow the question of Professor Bielecki probably a little bit. I'm just wondering if there is any discussion in Europe or in, say, communities in Europe concerning the major source of biomass as such on our continent, just thinking more globally. Because, you know, when you are talking about the development of IT businesses comparing to bio business, I think the reason why they are far ahead is pretty simple. At the end of the day, it's just that, you know, it's a simple game of costs and incomes. And with chemical processing as well as bioprocessing, you end up with a mature process which, if well designed, should have like minimum 80% on raw material, which means that majority of your costs lies in feedstock. And when you compare to what we have down here in Europe and what you have in countries of different climates and different resources, it turns out at the end of the day that we might not technically be able to be competitive. When you have a look on the history of biofuels, for example, that's a perfect example. Yeah, when we are still defending our market using just political tools because we are technically not able to overcome those obstacles that you have from climate, from basically all the objective things that are happening. And even if we end up with perfect technologies for biorefining, we're going to use a bioresource which will be, again, 80% of our production costs. And that is something which is bothering me. Do we have any answer for this sort of question? Do we really have resources that would be competitive globally with Southern America, with Far East, with Asia, with Southern Asia? Is there any discussion of this type in Europe nowadays?
Well, this is a discussion which is permanently led in many regions. And this is what I mean when I talk about a differentiated in-depth analysis. You know, first of all, biomass is not biomass. And biomass in this country is not biomass in this country. And you're absolutely right. And that's why I, in the very beginning, said there are various models, many bioeconomies, which will be very carefully looked at. I'll give you one example. We were making a potential analysis, so-called analysis on the potentials on the wood and forestry in northern part of North Rhine-Westphalia. And we gave up because we had to learn that the wood which was used there, which was much better used you know, for high qualified furniture in kitchens and many other areas, which brought much more money than anything else. So, you know, and now comes my trial of an answer to your question. We should concentrate on waste. Because waste is something which, but also very carefully look at that. Is it worthwhile? That if you look at and process it with this or that microorganism or with this and this insect, etc., that you have this and this result, you know, is it economic in the end? And that is something where I think we might, with respect to the bulk dimension of biomass, we have the only chance in Europe, you know, that we use, that we don't compete with the first steps of the value chain, if I may say so, but only with the last one. But this must be, and this is why I tell you, you know, go into the regions and make very rough analysis. And it's also very helpful if you arrive at a conclusion and say no. You know, a no can be much more valuable than a yes, because, you know, it helps you not to waste money and to make a misfailure or misinvestment. So, and don't be afraid if you arrive at negative results of something. You must always tell, you know, the same if there is a failure, you know, in a result of your experimental work, so what? You know, we have to learn in Europe to be much more generous with failures, you know, that, and mistakes than only celebrate as successes. You know, that's a big deficit of the Europeans. That would be my question. But it's a permanent topic in many, many projects and in many regions. But this is what you really need to tackle.
Just a short question to the GM reluctance and question to the GM reluctance in Europe, because you said €500,000 was spent on research whether GM is safe or unsafe.
Yeah.
But I think the problem of Europe is that we often spend money in research, leaving the public opinion aside, and we forget about informing the public opinion. Because if researchers know it's safe and keep it at conferences for other researchers, for scientists, the public opinion has no idea what's happening. Then what happens? NGOs inform the public opinion that GM might be dangerous, and nobody believes the scientists because their words are not made public. Whereas in Latin America, who informs the public about GM? It's the corporations which are using GM crops that create conferences, inform the public opinion, so they have a completely different first impression. Isn't it maybe a solution to spend some of the money instead of research, spending it on informing public opinion what we are actually researching?
Mm-hmm. Yes and no. The older I am, the more I'm skeptical, I tell you, because I have had so many experiences, practical experiences, that there was a very well informed group of people, but they made their living that they were against. And even if there is a fantastic argument and bulk of information, they don't change their mind because they live on it. We have indeed in Europe a kind of industry of people who live on the fact that they are against something without telling what should be done. That's a fact. That's a fact, and they make their living on it, and therefore you can't convince them. So I see some natural limits in conviction and persuasion for those who influence the public media and also the public opinion. What I think is maybe more of importance is that you have, let me say, credibility. And that is a word where science has to work on it itself. Science has lost some credibility in Europe because minority views were by the media really pumped up and popped up, etc. And then in the end, the customer, that means the citizen, and also the consumer, is embarrassed. He doesn't know whom should I whom should I believe, or should I believe anyone at all? And then in particular in the food industry, you had a lot of falsification, you had here a scandal, there a scandal. That is not so much building up confidence, if I may say so, in credibility, in scientific views, etc. There, Europe's science has to do a lot. And it is a question also for the politicians to build up a kind of support for political, for so-called scientific advice for policy. You know, this is really, there is also a deficit for that. The Commission at this moment wants to build up or has approved a mechanism of future advice on policies for the Commission by the national academies in many countries. They are not going now to a high-level group, which they appoint, which then can be attacked here or there, but they want to give this task to a group of national academies. And then also ask them, sometimes quick response, sometimes midterm response, long-term response, what is their view? Because these national agencies or academies might have another reputation than singled out researchers which have been appointed by the Commission. So it's a mixed bag, and I would think that it is too easy to think just to spend more money on information. There is a lot of money already spent on information, but many people are not even interested in it. You have to see that.
I'm Andrea Jubileuszowego from Brazil, and first of all, congratulations for your lecture. I think in many years we put thinking too much about just the economy, and now we have this tendency in thinking about the bio things and the environmental. And what is the secret to put this bio-ideological people and the people that has this strong business mind conversation to get some kind of equilibrium in terms of the bioeconomy?
What do you mean by? I didn't catch the word before.
Bio-ideological people. This is strong for this, like for people that think too much just in bio things, in just the environmental, and they get some fight with this economical, this extreme, this opposite people.
Okay. As I tried to explain already, the word bio is a little, well, mixed. You know, on one hand side, it has a negative attribute. A bio-freak is someone who is green, who loves nature, who is sloppy, etc., etc. Another one is bio might be simply organic farming. Another might be is genetically modified. So this is not easy in order to transfer this this word and also the meaning behind to the people. It is getting even, if I may say so, more rich or richer in conflict if you then add the word economy to it. You know, because at the beginning, about 2 years after we had invented this scheme of the bioeconomy, one of my colleague directors came to me and said, why don't we have nano-economy? Or why don't we have an info-economy or something like that? Why do we have a bioeconomy? Well, then I told him, very simple, because, you know, bio stands also for biological resources, but nano is simply a structure. It has no content. And info is a mechanism. So, but bio, and that is also from my point of view, the big difference between the bioeconomy and the circular economy. The circular economy is a mechanistic structure. It simply tells you, you know, you should reuse and multi-use, and then you might have a reduction of waste. But it never talks to you if you have 3 or 4 times used in a cascade form, you don't get a new function. this new function you get with the help of a microorganism, etc. But you can reduce the waste, and you can reduce also economic detriments, etc. But you never get a new function that you have a longer life or higher stability or less toxicity or something like that. You know, that's a difference, and that's why the word bio means is much more content oriented than many other prefixes, and maybe that rises this problem. Maybe.
Okay. I think that I will close the discussion just now, because we have to rethink again all the information we gained here, and I'm glad we have to applause this.
Thank you.
And addition that for the very guest speaker here at our seminar, I have a special award. So I will give you this award for the nice speech. It's I think wonderful channels.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
For
Wonderful channel. Yeah.
for the lecture and for the discussion. Dziękuję bardzo Państwu za przybycie na tym wykładzie. Dziękuję bardzo.